second one we're going to look at, though, is maybe they're lying. Maybe this is a conspiracy. 12 guys who had something to gain. They wanted to start a new world religion. And so they lied about this event. Sometimes it's called a conspiracy theory. All right, let's talk about that for a second. Successful conspiracies. Let's put one together right now. I get to work conspiracies all the time. 2 weeks ago, we had a murder. 2 guys were involved. They conspired to murder this old man. Okay. 2-person conspiracy. There are some things that I now have kind of identified as the key ingredients to successful conspiracies. If you want to do a conspiracy and get away with it, this is the way you do it, okay? You need to follow these steps. Number 1, you need to make sure that you have the smallest number of conspirators possible. A 2-person conspiracy is a lot better than a 5-person conspiracy because there's less people to rat you off later on, right? So, small number, keep it down. 2, you need to have a short conspiracy time span. So a great conspiracy is like the 2 of you go out and do the crime, and then you kill your partner right away. Down to 1, short time span, it's hard to break that kind of a conspiracy. But if you leave it open for 2 weeks, there's 2 weeks in which your partner can rat you off. So, you gotta be careful. 3, you need to have really good communication. You need to know what the other guy's saying. You need to be able to say, okay, if they ask us, what are you going to say? Okay, cool. He asked me that. I told him this. Got that? Okay, you say the same thing. If you've got great communication between your conspirators, you can do a lot with a conspiracy. But if you eliminate the communication, it becomes a problem. Also, you need to have, it's helpful if you've got a strong familial relationship. If I'm with my son doing conspiracy, I'm far less likely to want to give him up, right? He's my son after all. And finally, you want to have little or no pressure being put on you. If we go out and do a crime and no one ever asks us about it, there's a good chance we're going to get away with it. If somebody asks us, we might trip up. If someone pressures us, much better chance we're going to trip up, right? So what we did a couple weeks ago is we had 2 guys. We had an idea who one of them was, and I had some idea from the crime scene that he was probably not alone. It looked like there was at least 2 guys involved in the murder. So when we had the first guy ID'd, I sent a surveillance team, the one I used to be on. Let's go watch this guy for a few days. We'll figure out who the second guy is. Also, we'll get some information about what they're doing for those 3 days, right after the murder. We did that, took them into custody separate, so they didn't know we had both of them in custody. And then we slowly revealed to them that we had the other partner in custody in the other room. And we started to tell the first guy that the second guy had started to confess to the crime. Had he? No, of course not. But we provided the details from what we saw in the surveillance as though he had been told these details by the other guy. Crook number 1 realized, wow, he's got truth. He knows what we've been doing. He obviously has talked to the other guy. No, he hadn't yet. But because he could not, he was separated and there was no communication between the 2, he couldn't cross-check and verify. So he goes, he's starting to be compelled by the fact he thinks the other guy's giving him up, and he gives us another 20%. I go back to the second guy now, and I give him the first information I had, plus his partner's 20%. This guy's ratting me up. He gives me 30%. 2 hours later, they both were confessing on each other. Why? Because they were asked to hold on to the conspiracy too long. And in their case, only a couple days was too long. Also, they had no way to communicate with each other. Now, why do I tell you all this stuff? This is the earmarks of successful conspiracies. I want you to consider what would have to happen in order for 12 people, the apostles, to pull this off. It's possible. I just don't think it's reasonable. I think it's an impossible conspiracy. Here's why. Let's play it as a game of Clue. Here's our Clue game board, right? We'll change the game board just slightly. We'll make it a map of Palestine about the time of Jesus' ministry. There it is. Our game pieces will be the 12 apostles. Okay? Now let's just think about this for a second. The first problem they're going to have is time. How long are we asking these guys to hold on to the conspiracy? Is it a couple days, like my 2 murderers? No, it's nearly 60 years that I'm asking these guys to hold on to the conspiracy. Now, they're not going to be sitting in the same room with each other. The nearest any of them are going to be is some distance from each other, probably about 750 to 1,000 miles, are the nearest 2. But the one who's sitting in the Mediterranean in Italy is pretty far from Thomas in India. In a day when I've got no cell phones, no texting, no internet, no way to communicate with anybody, I don't know if Thomas has already given this up. And if I'm being pressured, recant, or die, why would I hold on to something that I think my partner's already given up? See, conspiracies break quickly when there's no communication, just like ours did. These guys had absolutely no communication because they're separated by thousands of miles. Now, what about the issue of pressure? Were they pressured? Yeah, they were Jack Bauer pressured. Let me tell you, they were pressured. Okay? They weren't just like, hey, tell us the truth or you're going to go to jail. That's pressure enough. They were being beaten and killed and gutted, and you name it, that was happening to them. That's a lot of pressure being put on them. As it turns out, were there any of these guys' family? Yeah, we had a couple sets of brothers. But what about Matthew? Why would Matthew hold on to this? What's Matthew's game in this? He doesn't even know these people. He was a tax collector. He was hated by these folks, and now is he going to die for these guys? See, we have problems with this conspiracy. This conspiracy doesn't really work, and I think we could break it too easily. And I think that history would have broken this conspiracy. And instead, what we have over history are 12 guys who never once recanted their testimony. There is no record of these 12 ever doing anything other than dying, with the exception of John, instead of recanting. So I just don't think is it possible? Well, sure, I mean, anything is possible, but motive is the question I have. What's in it for them? What is their motive to lie here? Does anyone know there's only 3 motives behind any murder, behind any crime at all? There's only 3 motives. Do you know what they are? What? Money. Financial greed. What else? Love? Sexual lust or relationship lust. Some kind of relationship, right? What's the third one? Pursuit of power. It can look a little different. Power can be, hey, you disrespected me. Nobody disrespects me. That could be a power thing. But it's position in your community, position in your neighborhood. It's power. These are the 3 motives behind any crime. Here they are. Yep. Financial greed, sexual lust, pursuit of power. That's behind every crime. So if I have a homicide, I'm always looking and saying, okay, what was in it for the murderer from a perspective of money? Was there a relationship that went bad? What kinds of work relationships or power? I mean, I'm looking in these circles to see where my killer is, right? Now think about this in terms of the apostles for a minute. What is it about the apostles that got them gain in one of these 3 areas? There have been historic liars who had something to gain and created a religious story because they had something to gain in one of these 3 areas. Think for a second of Joseph Smith. Now, I think Joseph had great motive. Does it mean that Joseph's lying? No. Motive alone does not make you a killer. But no one kills without a motive. Make sense? But having a motive does not mean you'll act on it. But think about what Joseph had in this. He's got written into his scripture that the church will sustain him financially. He married 34 wives over the course of his. He wrote in the scripture that God spoke to his first wife, Emma, and told her, don't be mad about Joe having all these wives. And not only that, at one time he ran for office. He ran for the presidency. He had the largest standing army on the North American continent aside from the United States Army. So in all 3 areas he had something to gain. If he was lying. Does it mean he's lying? No, but he had motive. Now I want you to look at the motive and measure it against the way the apostles died. Here's what was in it for the apostles. You've read what Paul said he went through in the letters, right? The way he was beaten and went hungry and cold and homeless. Every one of these apostles died in a miserable, their last day was not a good day for any one of these guys. And that's the thing I think we have to keep in mind as we look at what possible motive could they have to create this huge conspiracy. All of them died without any financial success, by themselves, and persecuted because of what they said they believed. If they're looking for position, it was their position that got them killed. So I think this, to me, does not work as an explanation. But even more than that, why would we have women be the first reporters at the tomb? That is powerful in this culture. It says the first people who saw Jesus were the women who hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said to them. He came to him. They came to him and clasped his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. So the very first witnesses are women. That sounds great today, but in this culture in the first century, you could not even get into a court of law as a witness if you were a woman. If I'm going to invent this story, I'm going to use somebody who has clout with the community to whom I'm trying to sell the lie. I'm going to have Joseph of Arimathea be the first witness. Nicodemus. I know somebody who is on the fence or is somebody who would have power in the community. I'm not going to use women as witnesses. But that's exactly what happened. I wonder why. Because that's who were the first witnesses. But more importantly than this, it seems to me, in the end, we've got to measure its reasonableness given the possibilities. And I think it's not reasonable for this reason. I don't think it explains the transformation that we saw in these men. Now look, you and I would die for a lie because we don't know. We weren't there to see. We're going on the reasonable inference from the evidence we have, right? But these guys would be in a unique position. They would know firsthand if it was a lie. For us to be transformed, to me, has got zero evidential value. But for them to be transformed, that has great evidential value because they would know if it was a lie. Does that make sense? So I've kind of crossed this off for those reasons. Now, what about the idea that it's a delusion? It's a hallucination that they had. Now, a lot's been talked about this by other apologists, and classically you may have heard some discussion of this, so I won't kind of beat that dead horse. But I want to just offer that sometimes I think the hallucination theory seems to have some merit because people think of the resurrection appearances on the one-on-ones. Here you've got Mary. She's by her, and Mark and John both say that she's the first person to see Jesus, and she's described as being alone. So she's got one person, one witness. Bing. Is it possible she could have hallucinated this? After all, she loved Jesus. She wanted to see him alive. Maybe she imagined it out of her sincere desire to see him alive. Okay, that could be reasonable. And look at here. You've got another person who's a one-on-one. Peter. Luke and Paul both say that Jesus appeared to Peter in a single one-on-one episode. And one guy, he wanted Jesus to be alive. He could have imagined it. I can get that. How about this one here? This is, let's look at James. James, Paul says, had a one-on-one encounter with Jesus and was transformed. His brother, who was a doubter when Jesus was alive, became a believer when seeing him one-on-one. But maybe he was just fooled, or he was, it's one person having a vision. That can happen. Let's go one more. Paul, his account says that the people who were on the horses with him didn't even get this. They didn't even see what he saw. So maybe he was just, for some reason had this vision, and he's one guy. So I think that the whole hallucination theory has had some appeal to people over the years because they think of these one-on-ones. But let's go forward and see all the different resurrection appearances. It's not just these one-on-ones. So for example, it gets a little trickier with the disciples coming from Emmaus. Now I've got two who said they saw the exact same, they experienced the exact same hallucination. It'd be like me saying, hey, I had a dream last night, and I was in a red convertible on Mulholland Drive. And you said, yeah, the top was down, right? And Nancy was in the back seat. I'm going, yeah, how did you know? And what did she say to me? She says, I'm having a good time on this drive. Yeah, you must have been. No one does that. Nobody has a dream and tells it to a friend, and their friend is in the dream with them. Right? If that's happening, it's because it's a memory. It's not a dream. And so when you see two people together having the same hallucination, get suspicious. So you have the three women in Matthew 28. This just gets worse and worse the more you look at it. You have more and more people being mentioned. How about the disciples at the sea in John? At least 5, probably 7 people are involved in that vision. What do you do with this one? It gets even worse when you have the people who are there, the disciples there before Thomas was there. Remember, Thomas wasn't in the room at first? It's described in Mark, Luke, and John. And we got 10 people who are having the same hallucination. And of course, that gets worse when you throw Thomas into the mix. So here we go. We got 11 we got to deal with. And we have several sightings in which 11 see Jesus. We have this sighting. Oh, you're the best. You can tell I'm losing it, huh? Thank you. So you have the same thing here at the mountaintop where you've got all 11 assembled. And every time you have this kind of an occasion where you have all 11 assembled, you've got to figure out, is it reasonable that all 11 could have the exact same hallucination? What do you do with this account here? Paul says at one point there were 500 eyewitnesses who saw Jesus at one point in time. So here I got all these folks, plus 226 on each side. See the problem? I don't know how this works in terms of a theory. It just seems very, very unreasonable. I've never liked this theory for that reason because I don't think you can have... But there's a deal breaker, even a better deal breaker with this. If I wanted to prove that these people were hallucinating, what's the first thing I'm going to do? Run back to the tomb. If the body's there, they hallucinated. If it's not there, then they're not hallucinating. They're liars because they stole the body out. And if they're liars, they're now on the other theory, which I don't trust because it's a conspiracy theory. So if you go to the tomb and the tomb's empty, they're not hallucinating. They're just pulling your leg. And now we're in conspiracy theory, which you've already eliminated. So we don't need to do that again. This is why Peter says, look, folks, I'm not making up stories, cleverly invented stories. We told you about the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ because we are eyewitnesses of His majesty. The claim has always been they were eyewitnesses. All right, so that's why I've ruled this one out. I don't think it explains the empty tomb at all. And now we're going to go to the idea that maybe they were fooled by an imposter. Somebody who tricked the 12, or the 11, if you want to add Matthias. Because let's face it, many people saw Jesus. There were over 70 in the upper room, right, when they selected the replacement for Judas. So how can this work? Do you know who this guy is? Anybody know who he is? Don't know him? His name is Charles Ponzi. Know who he is now? Yeah, he's kind of the guy we know famously for inventing Ponzi schemes. This guy basically bilked a bunch of people out of money on a pyramid scheme. One thing I learned, because we have a lot of guys in our detail, the homicide detail, that came out of forgery and fraud, there's a simple rule that all con artists have to have in place before they can successfully con their victims. This is it. You've got to know more about the topic than the person you're conning. And every Ponzi scheme has worked because the person doing the conning knows more about the business he says he has than the person he's conning. That's why he can fool him so easily. So the more you can talk the talk and walk the walk, the better chance you have of conning somebody, right? That's the problem I think I have with this theory to begin with, because it suggests then that I've got these disciples who know Jesus better than anybody. Yet there has to be at least one guy who knows Jesus better. And because the tomb is empty, he must have help. This is the problem I have with the theory. It quickly becomes a conspiracy theory. And we know the problem with conspiracy theories. But here's the other problem I have with it. You know the Jesus that we see before the resurrection? He has this kind of nasty habit of doing miracles, right? He's a miraculous Jesus. Well, the guy who's apparently conning the disciples afterwards apparently has the same supernatural powers. Because the Jesus after the resurrection is every bit as miraculous as the Jesus before the resurrection. This Jesus is still doing the same things. He's appearing miraculously according to Luke in the room. He's performing miraculous acts according to John. The book of Acts in the first chapter, verses 2 and 3, says that Jesus for 40 days did many convincing proofs to demonstrate that he was resurrected from the dead. Wow, this con artist is good because he's able to do all these miracles. Not only that, he's got that whole rope over the tree limb thing because this guy's even going to be able to ascend into heaven. You see the problem with this theory? It assumes that the con artist not only knows more about Jesus than the disciples, but he's able to mimic Jesus in his miraculous ability. I think if this guy's able to do that, he should have like co-credit with Jesus because he's the same guy. So I don't think it really works for that reason. So I would say yes, it's possible, but it's not reasonable based on the fact that they saw this risen Jesus who was able to perform miraculous acts.